welcome to Interview 360. I'm your host, Vanessa Kamazzi. Today, a change in the way we look and think about food, the very thing that is essential to our survival. My guest today is a creative scientist and food futurist, so we're taking a different look at how food is produced through technology, how it gets to our plates, and how we can lessen the impact of agriculture on our planet. Dr. Irwin Adam is here, and he says the future of food is right now. Hi, Doctor. So good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Irwin, you say the future of food is right now, not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, but today.
The decisions we make today around the foods that we consume will impact inevitably our future. We're starting to see all of these technologies converge on food and really helping determine what our path to tomorrow looks like. So that's everything from blockchain or artificial intelligence to robotics and automation, and all of these things are influencing how we're going to eat tomorrow. The most important point, though, is that it's the decisions we make as individuals that will decide what that tomorrow food looks like.
You're a creative scientist and a food futurist. And so I remember when I heard that title, it's sort of, I imagine Jetsons and I'm thinking futuristic, but what exactly does a food futurist do? What do you do? Sure.
So as a food futurist, we get to explore every aspect of food, from what food is, how it's produced, to how it's experienced, all the way up to where it exists in the world. And we get to explore all of those different avenues and start to create futures around the technologies that will influence that. And essentially, we're a mashup of individuals with very different backgrounds, right? So we have engineers, chemists, chefs, other creatives, designers, who come together to answer questions in food.
And I want to ask you about edible clouds, because I think that was one of sort of your first creations.
Sure. And it's our first way of getting people to think differently about the world around them. So the edible cloud, this is something that you can flavor and you can pour it and you can sip it, and it functions like a liquid beverage. A lot of this is designed around the physiology of eating.
Meaning your senses and how touch, feel.
Right. So when we eat, we obviously experience taste on our tongue. But then a huge part of how we experience flavor is really through our noses and through our retronasal sensing passage. So when we chew food, we generate these tiny aerosols that are very similar to what a cloud looks like. And those aerosols go up through the retronasal sensing passage, and they interact with what we call the olfactory neurons. Right? And those olfactory neurons are the shortest distance from the outside world to the middle of our brains. And those gather together in something called the olfactory bulb, which happens to be right next door to the memory cortex. And so that's the reason why smells are so linked strongly to memories. It's really just a geographical proximity of those two brain centers, right? So we started with an edible cloud, something that was cool and we got to play with, and we've never experienced with it anything like it before.
Can you please make an ice cream that's loaded with sugar, but that is somehow really healthy for you and you lose weight when you eat it?
Yeah, 100%.
Please, that's the future of food that I need. So that would take off.
We'll have like a virtual reality version of eating very soon that will allow us to have the experience of eating without the calories.
Listen, doctor, if anybody can do it, it's going to be you. I think you are the future of food.
All of our projects are meant to be gateways into something deeper that helps us understand ourselves better, but also the impact of what we do in the world on the world. So we know, for example, in terms of protein consumption, that not all proteins have the same impact on the world around us. Animal proteins tend to be costlier in terms of their environmental impact. Beef production being multiple times greater in terms of carbon output than smaller animal production, which still has magnitudes greater outputs than plant protein production.
And someone like you who's a scientist and engineering all of this, the Beyond Burger, I talk about that because it looks like meat, it tastes like meat, it mimics, it bleeds like meat, but it wasn't meat. It's completely made out of the lab. There's no livestock, there's no cattle.
The idea being, let's take the pressure off of animal products towards plant products. Parallel to that movement of creating new plant products that mimic meat, we also have started seeing the advent of cellular agriculture. where people are saying, hey, what happens if we still as a society want to eat meat tomorrow, and we want to eat meat the way meat exists today, but we want to make it animal free. And so that's the whole movement around cellular agriculture, which is saying, hey, what happens when I make a steak or a hamburger in the laboratory?
So you had a great TED Talk that I watched, and you opened the talk and the conversation, and you asked everybody in the room, you said, who here eats? And everybody had to raise their hand, which is to say that this is an issue that affects absolutely everyone.
It's absolutely everyone, and we really do decide the future with our mouths. You know, everything we consume is deciding the tomorrow of our planet. And I think there's a huge opportunity right now for us to really educate individuals on what those impacts look like and give them the tools they need to make decisions. And we are starting to understand the impact of that actually can make a huge difference in terms of us meeting our 2050 global climate change goals. But those decisions have to happen right now. And so there's a huge movement towards adopting Flexitarian style diets.
Okay, I like that word, Flexitarian.
Right, and the Flexitarian is saying, hey, like we don't need to 100% transition our whole way of living and, you know, culturally completely change what we're consuming, but we do have to start diversifying and reducing pressure from the sources of food that are impacting the world in the most negative ways.
So for you, the ultimate goal is to just make people more aware and to just be more conscientious.
We radically need to understand the impacts of the things that we consume on the world around us. You know, to date, we've really often viewed food as something that transforms ourselves as individuals, right? We think about nutrition, about calories or fat content or carbohydrates or other nutrients. That is really important, but we also have to start understanding how the things that we consume impact the world at large. And this understanding too that, you know, what we consume on the plate in front of us at the dinner table makes up, you know, about 14 to 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions, right? We don't really connect the fact that agriculture has the same carbon footprint or the same greenhouse gas impact on our Earth as all transportation in the world, right? Like all trucks, cars. Like we think of cars as we're like, we know those are polluting the Earth, but we don't think of agriculture in the same way, yet they're making the exact same impact.
That's astounding.
Right, so it's us saying, okay, well, let's acknowledge that first and then modify our behaviors in order to alleviate some of that impact as best as we can.
You're someone who's very avant-garde, you're forward-thinking. Would it be crazy to think that down the road that there could be more people in the world that are vegetarian or vegan than meat eating?
Well, we are seeing a transformation in the Western world right now where there's a huge shift towards, you know, being more plant-based. The challenges in other emerging economies around the world, you know, with a growing middle class, one of the main staples associated with the middle class is meat consumption, right? So you actually have a huge shift happening in many other countries where there are traditionally plant-based communities that are now becoming more animal protein-based. So that shift is happening rapidly, but we are going to have to acknowledge the impact of that. And it's through education, 100%. It's through education that people will begin to understand that the impact isn't just on my dining room table with my family. It's actually going to decide whether or not, you know, my kids live in a hospitable planet.
Right. But what about a place or a country like I lived in Argentina? And
Sure.
so do you think that in those countries where meat, you sit down, you have an asado, and it's very much a cultural thing as well. So how do you sort of break through those barriers and those boundaries in terms of culture when it comes to food? Because they're both so closely related.
You know, I do spend quite a bit of time in South America, and that's so ingrained in the culture is having meat as part of every single meal. In fact, culturally, it's not a meal if there is no meat. But the impacts of what that means for tomorrow are going to become very relevant very quickly, right? Soon we're going to live in a climate that if we continue on the path that we're on, we won't be able to even raise those cattle for beef in the way that we do today because the climate won't allow for us to grow the feed for those animals.
What is the future of food in farming?
So there are so many things that are changing in farming today as we speak. And in fact, many people think of farming as this outdated industry where people don't really use technology, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Today already we have farmers from all over the world who are implementing some of the most complex technologies, whether it's satellite-based navigation systems that allow them to automate the ways that their tractors go across their fields.
Okay.
Right? So when they're planting or harvesting, these tractors are basically following coordinates that are drawn on a map. And farming in some ways has evolved more and more into a computer game. Really, there's these dashboards that exist now that a farmer can really start monitoring every aspect of their
being more precise
property.
and sort of.
And so that's exactly it. We call it precision farming. So where every square meter of land can be analyzed for moisture, or nutrients, or whatnot, so that they can then be precisely adjusted rather than spraying your whole field with fertilizer that maybe 10% of the field actually needed. And where small farming has a lot of opportunities to benefit from technology is in things like automation, whether those are drones or robots. Having the tools that are needed in order to behave like a big farm, but really do it with a small number of individuals.
Right, that makes sense. But change is hard for someone who's also set in their ways as well.
Change is hard, but change is real. And again, it will become imperative when we start seeing the climate changing. Like that's 100%. There will be no longer a choice in the matter. There is a lot of hard work being done to transform how we behave, being less chemically intensive, being more precise in the way we apply herbicides, fertilizers, insecticides, maybe moving towards regenerative farming and what we might think of as organic farming as well.
What projects do you have coming up in the future?
We work pretty globally in terms of our projects, but something really exciting this year is that we're starting to embark on a venture that will be based in China and Australia. And I think China is such an incredible market for experiential retail and experiential food. And so this is our first foray into that market, and we'll start to understand more and more how we can contribute in that space. And so from the kind of the fun and cool stuff like edible clouds, there's certainly a huge opportunity there. But we also want to understand how we can impact and help educate people in China around the shifts that need to happen in consumption. Because this isn't something that's just in America. This is obviously something that's global, and China obviously has an incredibly massive market.
1.4 billion people, so big market.
1.4 billion people, and so this is a market that is very much active, and people are making decisions every day around consumption, and the understanding of the impact of those decisions is quite imperative for the world at large.
Okay, so that's the next big project. That sounds super cool, and I'm sure it will be amazing, so I look forward to seeing that when it does come out. Well, Irwin, it's been so great speaking with you today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching Interview 360. We'll see you again next time.